Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a few more moments for people to join. We have a lot of people joining us from across the province this morning. So if you can make sure to mute your microphone when you've joined. If you would like to say good morning to everyone, please feel free to use the chat, and we will be starting shortly. Okay, I think we've still got people coming in, but I think we can get started. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first 2023 Collaborative Futures mini conference. Very happy to see you all and very glad to be able to run this event again. I'd like to welcome everyone from around the province. We also this morning have some colleagues from the Ontario colleges. So welcome. It's great to have you join us this morning and be part of the conversation. We, as you can see, are recording this session. We will be making this available after the conference, and we will also be making all the slides available as well. We have two sessions or two blocks this morning with a bit of a break in the middle. I will take you to our schedule. We will have time for questions after each of the individual presentations as we're switching over, but we'll also have an open question period at 11:40 at the end of the session as well. Just a reminder that the Collaborative Futures mini conference is an opportunity for us to share our experiences working with Alma and Omni. We have a lot of presentations this morning, some great examples of how people are doing things locally that you may want to apply or that we just want to have larger discussions about. As you can see, we've also got live captions. You can turn on the live captions using the button at the bottom of your screen. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome this morning Catherine Davidson, who is the University Librarian at Ontario Tech University. She is the outgoing chair of the Collaborative Futures Steering Committee and has been involved very closely in Collaborative Futures for a very long time. So we are really happy to have her here this morning to do the welcome and the land acknowledgement. So Catherine, if you can turn on your screen, then I can hand over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Danica, and good morning, everybody. I'm just looking at the numbers. Right now, this is 144 people. I'm so thrilled to see those. And yes, I'm the University Librarian at Ontario Tech, but also Chief Librarian at Durham College. So I'm extra thrilled to hear about that we have 20-some colleagues from the colleges joining us today. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement as I'm coming to you from Ontario Tech. Ontario Tech University acknowledges the lands and people of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. These lands we are situated on are covered under the Williams Treaties and the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch of the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people. We acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who have cared for Turtle Island, also called North America, from before the arrival of settler peoples until this day. Most importantly, remember that the history of these lands has been tainted by poor treatment and a lack of friendship with the First Nations who call them home. This history is something we are all affected by, as we are all treaty people in Canada. We have a shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. So, Danica, thanks for the welcome, and I wouldn't miss this this mini conference for the world. I'm a huge fan, and as always, so appreciative and grateful for the people who put forward thoughtful and creative proposals. So today's program is really diverse in scope and breadth and features some interesting threads that I feel kind of interweave through the sessions. So I'm excited to learn more from our speakers as we hear from, starting just a high quick level overview, Danica and Nguyen, about the work done to make McMaster's research more discoverable through integrations with Omni and Borealis, Lunares, and Further. Tuan will follow, describing the work done at York to harvest eCampusOntario content, which I literally was just talking about the other day, how to go about doing that. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Tuan. Then, as an archivist wannabe, I'm looking forward to hearing from Jeremy and Henry about Queen's alphabet soup, involving the letters A, M, O, I, P, M, and H. And then Christina and Alie will describe the valiant attempts undertaken to import institutional repository content into PrimoVE, despite ex libris's opaque responses, I guess might be the best way to describe that. Then, after the break, Crystal will share some of the results of her extensive and truly impressive, honestly, analysis of resource sharing trends, which is an area that is near and dear to my heart. I'm looking forward to Carolyn's presentation on Alma D as she maps out the challenges of implementation and figuring out what should be stored where. And also I appreciate her inclusion of a scholarly kitchen post entitled "Do Libraries Still Dream Unified Dreams?" Recommend it. And which is a very nice segue to our final session from my former York colleagues, Patty, Bill, and Adam, who pose some important questions and suggest possible future directions for a shared print collection strategy. So I think it's over to Sarah at this point. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Sarah Cairns, and I'm your session moderator for the first half of the conference today. Just a quick note, if we could have presenters turn on their cameras during your sessions or at the start so we can pin you to the screen, we will do that. And we'll also ask that attendees please turn their cameras off during the sessions. So we have, the first session starts at 9:45. We have a few minutes here. And we do have some poll questions set up for the spaces between sessions. So I think maybe we'll go ahead and just test a poll question to see how that works while Danica and Nguyen are preparing to begin. So I'm going to launch one now. Does everyone see a would you rather question? Yes. Okay. So please feel welcome to vote on the would you rather question. And you can also add some more context to the chat if you have reasons why you would prefer one over the other. This one was confusing to me logistically. Randy says, oh Lord, neither. So like if you have a typewriter, you can say, type out your correspondence, and then you have to scan it into your computer and maybe use optical character recognition software. So that people can read, machines and people can read your text. So that one's quite cumbersome, but those of us who have been around for a while do remember the pains of dial-up, like the modem sounds at the beginning, and then taking a full minute to load a GeoCities page. So there are important considerations here. I will say that one, I can see the results. I can't share them with you until it's done, but one is significantly winning over the other. What a choice. I know it's a terrible choice for a Monday morning. I'm very sorry. There are more terrible choices to come, potentially. My dream of sending all docs as low res JPEGs could finally come true. Yeah, I mean, we could maybe just have to go back in that direction if this is the ultimatum that we receive. Some of us still have dial-up. Nice. So people who still have dial-up, do they still have that modem sound at the beginning? Is that still part of the experience? Laura only gets spammers calling her home phone anyway, so bring on the dial. Yep, that's fair. Taking me back to my early high school days. It was an exciting time, Alie, wasn't it? You know, like it was worth the wait. It's all we knew. A typewriter sound is more fun. Dial-up is too painful. This is all so true. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead. Does anybody have a prediction of which one is the winner? Which one would people prefer? Combining them into a fact. So Lacey thinks that perhaps typewriter won, Alie as well, and Mark. Okay, typewriter. So I'm going to end. I'm going to share. So 88% of 77%, 88 out of 115 respondents would rather only use a typewriter for all writing, and only 23% would go for the dial-up. So I mean that's a pretty solid. I mean it's maybe a biased sample overall, but like in terms of volume, I feel like it's a good sample size. Is the typewriter electric or manual? Yeah, like asking the real questions. The typewriter quality is a big deal. Also the quality of your scanner. Do you have the paid version of Adobe? Like, can you easily transfer your communications? So those are all crucial considerations. Okay, so thank you so much for confirming that our polling works. We figured out some important things here this morning already. So at this point, I would like to introduce our first session. So kicking us off this morning, we have Danica Evering and Wei Zhang from McMaster University, who are here with us to present their session titled Making Data Discoverable. Here it is on the screen, Connecting Omni to Dataverse and Beyond. Welcome, Danica and Wei.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Amazing. Okay, perfect. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having us to just share a little bit about how we connected Omni and Dataverse. So I'm here. My name is Danica Evering. I'm a research data management specialist at McMaster University. I'm a white person in my 30s, dyed blonde buzz cut, wearing a black shirt. That's for accessibility. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Wei, and I'll get Wei if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Wei Zhang. I'm the e-resources and collection analysis librarian at McMaster. Happy to be here today.
All right. So thank you, Catherine, for that lovely land acknowledgement. We're here in Hamilton in O'Hearn Wagoon on the lands protected by the Dishwathan Spoon Wampum, and specifically related to data sharing. There's a really great course by the First Nations Information Governance Center called OCAP, or Ownership, Control, Access, and Possession. That's a really interesting resource that folks can take if they're interested. So today we're going to talk about, just briefly, about our process of connecting Dataverse to Omni, which we're calling a small act with a big impact. So when we saw the call to share experiences working with Alma and Omni and enabling a new feature and enhancement and small but mighty wins, we thought we'd share our story. Wei and I worked together, I guess, last fall to connect Dataverse to Omni to make data sets discoverable. And this was made possible by significant contribution from UBC Library and the Canadian data librarian community to ensure that data sets that are in FDR, the Federated Research Data Repository, can be connected to Omni. So this is something that's available to everyone. Wei actually took a look recently, and it looks like most people have connected it already, which is amazing. So we're going to just talk a little bit about why, for those that aren't interested, why this is really so important in doing, and for those that haven't, explain a bit about how you can do it as well. So actually, I'm gonna share my other screen because we have a little Menti. So I'm gonna share that one instead. There we go. So the code is at the top. Go to menti.com and then click or start entering that code there. Just to ask, what is your familiarity with data sharing or data repositories? So maybe you know about it and have shared data. Maybe you have one and you're curious, your library has connected Dataverse, but you're curious to learn more. Maybe you've heard about data sharing, but not sure about repositories, or this is a new concept to you entirely. And this is just a random collection of cute animals from my phone, so hopefully that's good. Okay, really a wide range across the board. That's exciting. So that's very, very cool. And some people, it is a new concept entirely, so that's really great. All right, I will share this back again. So as a background, thanks to everyone for participating in that Menti. It's helpful to kind of see where we're at in terms of what our presentation is. So just to talk about why researchers would share data, and this is familiar for most of us in a research library, but this is new. So we have our researcher here producing research data, and then maybe a publication. This could be found by another researcher or research team, and they might write a publication citing your findings. But then when you ask for the data, when they ask for the data to back up what they're finding, maybe they're looking to reproduce your data or just feel confident in the results, we often see this statement, data available upon request. So the data could be missing. Sometimes this researcher, the original researcher, might have moved to a different school. Maybe they have the data, but it's kept on a lonely hard drive. Maybe they don't want to share it. There are many reasons and many excuses that happen with this data available upon request in the journal footer. So it kind of is a way of giving the appearance of sharing, but in practice, there are often really lengthy delays to get the data. And so this connects to a reproducibility crisis that we have seen in sciences. And a survey conducted by Nature indicated that more than 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce another researcher's experiments. And we can see with this Vines graphic that over the course of time, data is missing, that the odds of raw data being extant drop dramatically over time. So in terms of the archive, this can be a real problem. So in an idealized world, in a best case scenario, we have the same researcher with the research data and producing a publication, but in this case, they publish it in a trusted data repository, which could be Dataverse. This might be used by another research team and combining with their research with your research data to produce a publication with a broader data set. It could look like a new researcher kind of like interpreting the data in a new way. Or we can have the researcher combining your research data with other people's research data to produce a meta study in the research area. And all of this leads to citations, but it can also lead to collaboration. So we've been hearing from some researchers who've shared research data actually in Dataverse, who are then hearing from other people who want to use the research data, which can lead to new collaborations, which is a really exciting opportunity for researchers. And so for this trusted data repository, Borealis is an initiative of Scholars Portal and the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And this is a really great option, but there are many, many different repositories. So we're just encouraging researchers to deposit data and make sure that it's protected for the future and also potentially shared. So many of you might have heard of McMaster Dataverse. This is an institutional data repository. This is the one at McMaster. It is part of Borealis, the Canadian Dataverse repository, which is formed on open source software out of Harvard. Harvard Dataverse was the first, and then they've shared the software for other people to use. And there's a really longstanding group of people in Canada who've been working with this software. This is a partnership between the Regional Library Consortia, research organizations, and the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And the infrastructure is managed by Scholars Portal and the University of Toronto Libraries. So this is a really great option, and it is also connected to Further. So we're gonna, I think, see that in the next slide. Oh dear. Okay, can you still see that? I think so. Okay, great. So just 1 second. I'm not sure why it's not advancing the next slide for me. There we go. So this is the research data management lifecycle. We can see that we're moving through data management planning to ethics applications and research proposals, through collection and analysis, and then eventually to publication and data sharing. And then the last step, or the first step, is discovery and reuse. And it could be the last step or the first step, that we want people to publish their data and share it, but then also be able to discover it and reuse it. And so this is the crucial step. Like, how does this step happen? How do people find and reuse data? How would you be able to make sure that the data is actually activated instead of just sitting in the data repository, that it could find somebody, someone else to use it? So I offer to you the connection between Borealis and Omni, which is enabled through Further or Lunaris. This is connected through metadata and persistent identification. It supports a culture of open research, and it moves us beyond publications. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think this is a really crucial step, that we start viewing research beyond just a publication to data as well, and software and those kind of things. So as just a background context, we can just to give an idea about how this happens. So in 2021, the University of BC Library Research Commons worked with ProQuest. This was a collaboration between Eugene Barsky, Kelly Stathis, and Alex Garnett, and they made sure that data sets could be indexed in the Federated Research Data Repository to become findable in ProQuest Central Discovery Index. The collaboration records from Further would become visible in Summon, Primo, Alma, and Omni. So I'll share a little bit about what that looks like, but this would give researchers and patrons at all levels access to 100+ data repositories and over 70,000 open data set records. So just to give the diagram again, the researcher shares data in, let's say, Borealis data repository. This is connected to the network across Canada of all the Canadian Dataverse repositories through Borealis, and then to Further, which is the Federated Research Data Repository. All of this is connected through metadata. And then from Further, it's indexed in Google Dataset Search, in OpenAIR, which is the EU Commission funded service to support open science and open access, and then also ProQuest. So this is a really exciting option to connect researchers' data with a wider discovery. So just to note that this might be changing soon, the naming of it. Further has unveiled a separate entity, a discovery entity called Lunaris, but this is really how it happens, is through the connection between Further and Borealis. So we can see here, this is a data set at McMaster by Yurick Kolassa, and then it is visible in Lunaris already. And then Wei is going to explain how.
Okay, right. So my slides here. Okay, so to support McMaster's research data management strategy, one of the first steps is to make research data discoverable to our users. And this couldn't have been achieved easily without adopting Omni. As many of you know, McMaster migrated to Alma and joined Collaborative Futures last June. So we are still learning all the powerful features that Omni Alma has to offer. In this case, Further, simply activating for full text in CDI only makes the richness of the research data discoverable in our Omni to our Omni users, and full text linking to the data source possible. So as we are quite new, I guess this is not something so new to other Omni users, but we are so excited that this is so easily achievable. And as you can see, the example that Danica used is discoverable in our Omni, and also, sorry, the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is our Omni example, and I have a bunch of slides to show you going forward. And the next slide shows the filter. Next slide, please. The filter for, oh, I'm sorry, one slide, yes. So the filter for data sets is very useful to our users as well. So if you're doing a search in our Omni, and the results can be overwhelming, and if you're looking for data sets, and our users can use this filter fairly easily to find what they need. Next slide, please. And of course, we want to maintain multiple access points to our users depending on their needs. So we have federated research data repository visible as a database in our Omni as well. And next page. So as Danica earlier mentioned, there's a separate discovery layer of further available now, actually, as of late, the end of March, I think, this year. So it's fairly new, and it is separate discovery layer, and further, I believe, will remain the depository. So to make our users, to help users to access to these separate entities now, we decide that we create a separate database record for Lunarius as well. And it is so new, and this record is not available anywhere. So thanks to my colleague at McMaster, we created an original record and contributed to CZ already. I believe it is still being reviewed, so hopefully it will be available to all other Omni users as well. Or CDI users, I would say. Next page, please. Because our migration to Omni is fairly recent, we have kept our database tab in our homepage, just because some users are used to it and some users really like to have separate database lists. So we have all the databases listed in this tab as well, as you can see in another screenshot. So Lunarius is here, and the last slide. Yes, Borealis. So that's how we make several access points available to our user, just to promote the use and the deposit of research data into these trustworthy data repositories. Back to you, Danica.
Thank you so much, Wei, and thanks so much for that contribution. I think that'll be really helpful for everyone. To end, we just wanted to share that, emphasize the point that research is not and should not be publications alone. Beyond resisting the fabled aphorism publish or perish and framing around research being generated by a singular author, so many other research activities are essential. Initiatives like DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, have been working to recognize the many and varied outputs of research, not only the articles reporting new knowledge, but also data, reagents, software, intellectual property, and highly trained young researchers. This is a crucial shift for citation and credit, research impact funding, and 10-year promotion considerations. Although DORA was drafted over 10 years ago, this endeavor still needs work. What if students look towards their future as researchers and imagine their value not just through publishing, but through collaborations, software, methodologies, community relationships, trainees, and yes, data? Connecting Borealis via Further so that we can see data in Omni is a small step, but it's a small step towards making visible one facet of many that make up the incredible diversity of research outputs, which is crucial for the future of research. So thanks, Wei. That's such an important contribution that we've accomplished.
Right. Thank you so much, Danica and Wei. That was wonderfully informative. We will jump to the next session now, but we do have an open question period that will be coming up after the last session, which will be at 11:40. So if anybody wants to hold on to questions until then you're welcome to ask them at that point. So without further ado, our next session is brought to us by Tuan Nguyen from York University, who will be presenting on harvesting eCampusOntario open library collections. Welcome, Tuan.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. I'm here to basically do a show and tell of how we went about harvesting this collection into our Omni. Do I have share screen permission?
You do, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna. Okay. All right, can you see my screen yet?
Yeah, we can see your full PowerPoint, and yep, there it is. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So just a quick introduction. So we were approached by eCampusOntario to harvest the collection into our Omni. So initially, they proposed that we import a bunch of MARC records. And then we found out that they actually use DSpace as the backend to their collection. And so we proposed that we could use OAI-PMH to harvest the collection. Just bear with me for 1 second. I'm losing my screens. So the next I'm gonna show what the collections are, and then we'll go into the configuration. So there are 3 collections that we were asked to harvest, and one is the OER collection, which is this one. I'm just gonna see if I can show the screen to what it looks like. Can you see the link that I just clicked on?
Yeah, list of records.
Okay, perfect. So basically, this is what it would look like if you were to go to this collection from a browser. These are basically metadata that we're going to be ingesting. And when you go to the collection, the library site, at the Open Library site, you'll see these records that you can then read or download books and various OER items. And so that's one collection. The next one is the VLS collection. Similar to that, so there's 3 collections. And then the OEX collection. Now we're going to go into configuration in Alma quickly. These are the steps. Let me just switch over to my Alma screen. Can everyone see my Alma screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so first we're going to go into creating normalization rules. So before you can ingest the data, you want to make sure that you can have all the different normalization rules convert that OAI data into the format that Omni would be able to display. So here, we're going to go in and create the normalization rules for external data sources. And you can create a new rule, normalization discovery, and you can give it a name. Let's say, I'll say eCampusOntario test. And this would be set to Dublin core. And it says the access level to share it. If you want to share it to other people. And in this normalization rule, there is a bunch of rules that we've done already that we are sharing with folks who will be ingesting these records. And I think Mary Gu from eCampusOntario will reach out to next few institution to request that their collection be ingested. So I'm just gonna copy and paste some of the text, that some of the rules that we already have. And we can say. So once you create the normalization rules, you're gonna have to create the task, the normalization task for it to be processed. So that will be in the configuration, discovery, and again, normalization task is right here. Normalization process task. And in here, you're going to create a new one. I already have one set up, but I'm just going to show how you would create it. So you can create one and choose discovery bib records. Title discovery normalization. Here, just say eCampusOntario campus. Give it another test so I know it's separate from the other one. And in there, you can then add a task and choose the import rule normalization. And then you just have to click next. And you then can choose the one that you created. This one, eCampusOntario test. And say, so now you've created a task for normalization. Next, you'll need to create the discovery import profile. And that will be in configuration, discovery, and it will be in loading external data source, discovery, import profiles. And in here, we'll just add a new profile and choose discovery. And then we'll here just eCampusOntario test. And we'll just give it a code. eCampusOntario test. And this will be the space that we're harvesting. And the format would be Dublin core. And the protocol import would be OAI. And here, we'll just label eCampusOntario test. And with that, we'll just have to enter the last piece here. That is the URL for their DSpace OAI interface. So we'll just paste it here. And there's no need to any authentication, but you have to click on the connect and edit. And I have typed in connect and edit. And if everything is okay, it will start to fill up with all these different parameters. And then in the metadata prefix, we'll just have to choose OAI-DC. And the set would be Ontario, one of the collection that we want. So let's say, for example, we're doing the OER collection. That would be this set. And we can leave all of that empty. And here, if we want to get everything, then we just blank out this field, and then that's it. Next, and then in here, you're given a choice to normalize the data, and which we already set normalization rule before. So now it's available as a selection. And next. Now we're getting to a point where we can then show select how to link to each of these individual records. So in here, in the metadata, there's a field, identifier field that goes to the Open Library website for that record. Several different identifiers. The identifier that we want is the one that has this UUID number. And so the normalization rule that we had there is already using that. Plus there's an actual link, this particular link here, that would goes to the website right here, where you can access, the viewer can access it. So in here, we'll just choose the template for the linking parameter. And in here, we'll just type in linking parameter number 1. And here we can then link parameters. You can select the 3 dots here under linking parameter 1 and edit. So basically, you can choose because the discovery rule that we set will put that identifier into a field called discovery local 49, and then we can use that as the link. So using a regular expression to match the string from the OAI data, we can then now use a regular expression to select that identifier as a linking. Normalization, using a regular expression, and paste, here's the rules that you can put in, save it. So with that, you have the local 49, the local field selected. We can then save this rule. And now this import profile has been created successfully. You can now run it to start the import. So you click here in this, you can click run, which I'm not gonna do right now. So these are the one that we've already run, and you can see the history that it has been run and will be scheduled to run whatever schedule that you want to set it to. So once that's done, you can now check that you can have a record that one of the records that you have, we have in here. For example, this particular one, I'm just going to quickly search for that in our Omni. And it's available as an online resource and with a link to the Ontario eCampusOntario website. So you click on that, you'll be back to the actual record. And that is all that you have to do. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to do the optional part, which I'll share the documentation that when you are time to do it, you have the full details of all the steps in here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tuan. That's a very useful demo, and I will remind everyone that this is being recorded, so people can go back and visit it later. We are moving along at a very brisk pace, so if you do have questions, you're welcome to put them into the Q&A, and we will bring them back up at the Q&A session at the end of, right after the last session, which will be at 11:40 a.m. So up next, we have Jeremy Heil and Henry Hahn from Queen's University discussing archival collection discoverability in their session titled Alphabet Soup, Atom into Omni through the Open Archives Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting. Welcome, Jeremy and Henry.
Thank you so much. I'm just sharing my screen now and getting us all started. Yes, I am Jeremy Heil, and I am the Digital and Private Records Archivist here at Queen's University Archives. My co-presenter, Henry Han, is here as well. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Henry Han from Queen's University, and I'm an application support technician. Yep, back to Jeremy.
Thank you. So I'll be presenting throughout this entire thing, and Henry will chime in with questions afterwards. He is the main driver of a lot of the technical side of what we've been able to do through this. But has asked if I could just present on his behalf as well. So hopefully, if I've made any mistakes, he'll just chime in and let me know where I've gone wrong. So we're talking to you today from the traditional and ancestral territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, and we are very privileged to be able to work, play, and live on these wonderful lands, and hope that we have done them honor when we have passed through them as well. So we're following up actually on I loved what Tuan was able to present, because this is very much a continuation of the same sort of idea, and some of the things that you'll see in this presentation will actually be very similar to the last one, but a little more specific to Adam. So to give you just a bit of a brief background, Queen's University Archives moved from DBTeX databases into the Adam system in 2011 and have been using it ever since. So for those of you who may not be familiar with what Adam is, it is an open source software that is produced by Artifactual Systems in Vancouver. This particular software is visible to external crawlers, so we can search them through Google and through everything else. But as I mentioned in our presentation notes advertising this, we want to make sure that we are going to where the students are. So number one, where do they go when they're looking for resources? They're looking probably at Omni, first and foremost. Yeah, sometimes they're probably looking at Google too, but that's okay. At least we're covering both our bases here. So what we wanted to do, and we've been talking about this for a long time, was being able to pull from Adam into Omni, because we do have OAI-PMH capabilities within Adam. And we talked about this early on when Omni first started, and we actually reached out to a number of other Adam users who we know were part of Collaborative Futures. So I wish to apologize personally to anyone who's here and you heard from me years ago when I said, let's do this, and then we didn't do it, simply because, things get in the way, and then, other things get in the way, like global pandemics and stuff. So I'm here to present today the way to do it, as opposed to what our collaboration is. So it's a bit of a backwards collaboration, I suppose. So we were very fortunate to have someone like Henry, be able to join us in most recently last year, because now we had some new staff and we were able to get some new focus and then refocus on some of these important initiatives to make our collections in Queen's University Archives more visible to all of our researchers. So what we were able to do was find two different models to integrate into Omni. The first one was actually by necessity, and I'll explain that in a bit more, which was to import from Adam to Omni using DC XML. So we realized early on, because we had a couple of technical issues when we were first testing this out, that this actually was beneficial, because not everyone manages their own Adam instance. They may have a service provided to them, maybe through Artifactual even, where this is hosted. And you don't always have access to the back end the way that we do. So in this case, you don't actually need to have any configuration required in the Adam server if you're just doing an export from Adam and then importing directly into Omni. And you can also manipulate your data. So if you want to change how the data looks when you're putting it into Omni, you can do that. But of course, the big con is that it's all manual versus the OAI harvest, which of course is automatic. But we realized that we needed to do a little bit of additional configuration in the Adam server. which I will touch on a little bit later too, because what Tuan was just presenting was really interesting, because this is a slightly different way from what they were doing at York. But also, this also was perfectly functional as well. So moving into the beginning part of how do we import to Atom from Omni, we had actually encountered an issue with our own custom theming in Atom, where a single blank line was introduced. So I wish to thank University of Ottawa for pointing that out to us so we could fix it, and which actually then prompted how we were able to go to OAI, because then it was actually misadjusting our OAI endpoint. So we started by actually exporting CSV data from Atom, which you can do from the front end of Atom by just clicking Export CSV, and after you browse all archival descriptions, or you can do it from the command line. Again, if you have access to the command line, where you can, you will notice here that we have limited it to current level only. So just to give a bit of a background on our own Atom instance, we have approximately 3,000, well, not approximately, we have exactly 3,194 upper level descriptions, being the collection, the phone level, and sort of discrete items that are one-off items that we have. Within that, we have nested 371,601 child descriptions. So this is an awful lot of description that we would be pushing into Omni if we just left it alone. But the converse side of that is that we actually have a lot of descriptions that would say correspondence, maybe 1,000 times over. So devoid of any of the context that you get within Atom itself, because of the nature of it's a hierarchical database, you would lose that within Omni in its current incarnation. So we don't want to basically replicate everything that we have there. We just want to be able to give everyone a flavor of what you will find in the system in Omni, and then be able to link back to the full context of everything that you should be able to find, and directly find files or items or photographs or whatever else we happen to have described in Atom. So this is why we've limited it to the current level only for this, this case here. So from the CSV, we reformat it. And in this case, I am also going to say this is a slight technical limitation that we were working with, because we hadn't upgraded to the most recent version of Atom, which was 2.7.2. So in 2.6.4, the CSV export didn't include the slug. So basically, how do you get from point A to point B from Omni to be able to link back to our descriptions, which in the newer versions of Atom actually allow for that. Again, completely different scenario here, where we need to make sure that we're just updating our things, but we are also undergoing some work on new servers as well. So we won't put the cart before the horse here. So this is just how we were able to do that. It could be hit and miss, I suppose. If we've adjusted our slugs within the Atom system, it may not always work. So we were taking a bit of a gamble here, but it worked. It was actually perfect the way that worked. You could probably ignore this slide if you have 2.7.2. You won't have to worry about it. And then we have to create the Dublin Core XML. So one quick thing about Atom, it doesn't have Dublin Core XML embedded within it as from the entire collection. It only produces EAD XML, so encoded archival description. So we needed to pare that down to Dublin Core only. And we were able to follow, of course, the Xlibris Group's Dublin Core XML using Excel. And then in this particular, we created a script, actually, Henry, sorry, created a script in Python to convert CSV to XML. So this is shareable, available right here. And we may make it available elsewhere too. I think we have a GitHub somewhere that we may be able to post it to. So in the Alma settings, we just saw this in Tuan's presentation, so I won't go over this too much. But for Atom to Omni, you do it as an uploaded file in XML with Dublin Core, and then use the DC identifier as the Dublin Core tag. So we were able to create that again within the Dublin Core that we were creating with this using the slug and the URL to be able to link back to it as well in the linked resource. So on to the OAI harvest. So again, if the way that we did it here, so if you have the Atom server and config files available, you can do a lot more with it. But the way that Tuan had mentioned, it looks like that you can use something like regex to also circumvent that. So this is really, really interesting. But here, so this is again the idea of the DC identifier, where we have 3 identifiers. How do you distinguish between what the identifiers are when in fact you want the first one that's in there, not in the header, being where is this actually located and how do we link back to it? So in this case, we edited the XML PHP in the Atom server by actually going into where this file location is and adding an XSI type to be DC terms URI, which means that we can now choose that from the Alma configuration. And so in here, of course, this looks very similar to what was presented in the last presentation, where now we were able to link it with OAI through XML Dublin Core. And here's some additional details related to how you find OAI, especially in the base URL for the Atom instance. In our case, of course, dbarchives.library.queensu, etc. And then we can, instead of going through regex, you just can identify it as the DC identifier, DC terms URI. So we've just sort of gone the other way around with this. So we set up normalization rules in here, and this is how we did that. So happy to, of course, have shared this with you. Most of you have probably already done this before anyway. I was actually very pleased to be able to see how it worked from the other side, because I don't actually work in Omni at all. I work on Atom exclusively. And then we have what is available to us now with archives being searchable and usable as a filter in our Omni instance, which then links back to each one of these things links back to our own Atom instance. I can actually, I think we have about 2 minutes left for any questions, or I can also show you what it looks like on the Atom side as well. But I can leave it at that for now, and I thank you very much for listening.
We do indeed have 2 minutes left, and we do have a question here. I saw a question from Stephen pop up.
Sorry, that was an inadvertent hand.
Oh, okay. Not a problem. So
I was trying to clap, but I raised a hand.
Stephen can ask me that question anytime, I'm sure.
Do we have any other questions for Jeremy and Henry? Just applause. Applause is welcome as well.
Lovely.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jeremy and Henry. If anybody does come up with a question for Jeremy, Henry, or any of the other presenters for this morning, we can take a couple minutes at 10:45 for those. It'll just cut into our break a little bit. In the meantime, though, up next, we have our last session before our mid-morning break. And we have Christina, Zoricic, and Alie Visser, who are here with us from Western University to share about their Alma migration woes in a presentation titled Failed Jobs, Import Data to PrimoVE, Institutional Repository Edition. Welcome, Christina and Alie.
Thank you. Oh, there's Alie. I couldn't find you for a second. Okay, let me share my screen. I can do this. Here we go. Oh, wait, that's not the one I wanted. This one, give me 1 second. This is the one I wanted. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Thanks, everybody. Hello. So I am, sorry, hold on 1 second. I need to do one thing first. My bad. My notes on the wrong screen. You guys don't all need to see my notes too. There we go. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Hi. So my name is Christina Zoricic, and actually I'll let Alie introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Alie Visser. I am a metadata management librarian at Western.
I guess I'll just do a quick land acknowledgement too. So I'm speaking to you from the campus of University of Western Ontario, which is situated on the traditional treaties of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, the Lenapehouk and the Chinongta nations. And these are lands that are connected to the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. So our talk today, Failed Jobs, Importing Data to PrimoVE Institutional Repository Edition. Let me just go to the summary. So for background and context, what we're going to be talking to you about today, I'm going to talk about the background and context, and then the some migration promises and assumptions. And I will say that the theme today of Cobra chickens is literally from the idea of migrating and migration and how funny it can be. So we'll talk about our import profile configuration, the adventures of our failed jobs, and what we tried, and then an ask for help. But it's funny because in ask for help, we've already seen a little bit of help that may have kind of pushed us a few steps further along. Thank you to Tuan for your presentation. And then it sounds like we are all kind of have, we're all different versions on a theme today, so or this morning. So that's really interesting to see. So before we migrated our platforms, we used Summon as our discovery layer, Sierra as our catalog, and used BE Press as our institutional repository at Western. So in 2012, or I think it was around 2012, we made a decision to stop cataloging our theses, electronic theses and dissertations, because we were, in one of those crunch periods of lacking resources and staffing time. So one of the decisions that we made was that we would stop cataloging our theses and dissertations because they were indexed in the discovery layer and searchable and discoverable with all other content in one search. And at that time, it made sense because both the discovery layer and the IR were managed by metadata librarians on the team and in the unit. And so we kind of like knew how to go and talk to people for quick fixes. And so 2018, around that time, we had Western Libraries Organizational Renewal Initiative. And with that, the responsibility for the IR shifted to a new team. So that moved to the Research and Scalcom team. And so it that's where like the divergence of metadata control, I think, happened. And then in 2019-20, and then obviously beyond what I like to call the dark times and the perfect storm of where we're at right now, which was post-ORI, post-migration, post-pandemic. And we finally, what year is it? 2023, 3 years out, have actually had the time and like the mental refresh to actually relook at this issue and problem. Oh, and then the next slide, that's still me too, sorry. So the institutional repository in context, our institutional repository we call Scholarship at Western. It's managed by BE Press. It's not managed within the department, and we no longer catalog theses and dissertations. So the BE Press theses and dissertations, it's user-generated metadata. So there's a lot of copying and pasting from Word created documents. And this obviously has resulted in scores of encoding errors that will break our import process. And I should also say that Scholarship Western is not just our repository for electronic theses and dissertation. It also includes ebooks, reports, and working papers. We host conferences and symposia, and then also have select digitized special collections there as well. And I'll pass it over to Alie. Oh, if I can, Alie, there we go. Can you talk? Oh, you're muted, Alie. Or is this still me?
Yeah, I think it's still you.
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh yeah, migrations, promises, and assumptions. That's right. Sorry. So I think one of the things that I just wanted to point out, and I think some of our colleagues have also alluded to this, is that we really didn't know enough to ask clear questions about how the data would be represented in the discovery system moving forward. So because in Summon and BE Press and Summon played well together and worked really smoothly, so we kind of made an assumption that it would operate smoothly and work the same way in PrimoVE, and boy, you know what they say about people who assume things, I guess. So we were really frustrated through this process because we just assumed it would work the same way. And because Summon and I guess Ex Libris are now both ProQuest, or at the time had become both ProQuest companies, we didn't think we really needed to have a lot of intervention, and that it was just a thing that would work seamlessly that we didn't need to consider. But boy, were we wrong. Okay, now over to Alie.
Yes. Okay, so what you're looking at is our import profile for discovery import. So this is the first part of the profile that Ex Libris set up for us upon request after we migrated. They set most of the parameters for us, including BE Press and Digital Commons, which both use Dublin Core and OAI for import. Next slide.
Oops, first, I would hope if I was in the right window. There we go.
Okay, so this is the second part of the import profile. And so the OAI base URL and date for the earliest date stamp for the repository was added. And with all of this information that has been set in the profile, we ran it. Next slide. And of course, not long after running the profile, we received this failed job report with an error that said invalid XML character Unicode 0xB was found. So needless to say, as Christina said, we were disappointed and frustrated. And so we couldn't see what the error was based on this basic report. So we contacted Ex Libris to ask, which you can see the response here on the screen. So basically, the first response Ex Libris told us was essentially the job failed because it found a corrupted character. Okay, that's great. We asked them, can you tell us what the character was and if we could see it, or can we fix it somehow so that it will stop the job from failing? The second response we got back was that Alma is not designed to do this. So please consider it an enhancement request for the idea exchange. Their second idea was to check the data manually for invalid characters and replace it. This is a little difficult because we have 50,000 plus records in our IR, so that's not particularly feasible. And also, as Christina mentioned before, the import profile will still break going forward when new information is added by our users who are copying and pasting it from Microsoft Word. And the third thing is we just don't have the staff capacity to fix all of the records manually, which is why we stopped cataloging them in the first place. Next slide. So what have we tried to do to move this forward? We wanted to use a discovery import profile in the first place so that we didn't have to import the records into Alma if at all possible. Second thing was we asked Ex Libris if they could continue the job and ignore any invalid characters the way that Summon used to, and they said it was not possible on their end to do that. And then the third thing we did was we contacted BE Press and asked for assistance. They basically suggested that we try ingesting the data a different way, but didn't provide us with any guidance or suggestions on how to do that. Next slide. So we're curious. Our partners in Collaborative Futures, are you guys using a resources digital import profile rather than a discovery profile? We tried doing a digital import profile for our dissertations and theses subset just alone. But again, we received errors with the validation. So here's the first image. Next slide. This is the second image of the error job report that we received. So basically 9188 records were processed, which is the same amount that was also not imported. So a fail. Next slide. And then this is the error message that displays that the DC fields used in our IR are invalid. And so basically it's been an overall frustrating process for us. And that's why we wanted to talk to everybody here, get some ideas, get some feedback. And obviously we've heard from our partners before us who presented, you know, previous to us, which was great information. Christina, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'll add, so Alie and I were like frantically texting on the back channel during some of the presentations earlier. And then I was fiddling with some stuff. So we've made a little bit of progress in like the past 10 minutes, but progress that we really haven't. And I think what it comes down to is that our DC is very custom as well. That's part of the problem. So I think there's more fiddling that needs to be done, but it's just like, it's annoying when a system worked really smoothly with no intervention in the past, and now it's like we have to do so much more. Oh, look, and then there's suggestions. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat now. Pots on both BE Press and Alma houses for failing to follow.
Yes, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Yes.
We agree.
And then Paul suggests, can you do a search and replace on the XML file to replace all? Yeah, so that's not the only 0xb character that comes up. There's a whole bunch. That's just the first one that it stopped at. There's many others as well. So it would, we could, but because the Digital Commons, ePress repository is not a static repository and is constantly being updated, it's still work that we would need to do every time moving forward. If we did it a manual XML load. So we were trying to automate. I guess we could script it or script the corrections. I don't know. Things to think about. And also, I feel like I'm over time. Are we over time, Sarah? Sorry.
No, you're good. Thanks so much. And if there are any other questions, please feel welcome to share them in the chat. We're at 10:44, so we are headed into the break. Jeff says perhaps an intermediate server script to retrieve / clean up the XML.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess all of these are possible. And I think where I go is that I just get annoyed that this was a lazy, I'm lazy, and I feel like most catalogers, programmers are generally lazy, and like I just want it to work without needing intervention and have it skip the errors and just display, and it's not doing that.
There are a couple other suggestions coming in through the chat. Dan Scott says maybe you could have an automated job that sucks in the XML, runs a Python or other language script that cleans the XML, and have Alma pull from that. Yeah, or what Jeff said. And then Dan says might be able to call the import profile afterwards via API. Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. That gives us some options for sure. Yeah. Oh, Randy, yes, collaboration. This is collaboration live time. Absolutely.
But it's funny that, like we were saying, that so many of us are dealing with the same issue, but maybe with different systems. So it's good to hear in some ways.
And I wonder if other people were feeling the same frustration, that the like support documentation on the pieces just is like, it's just not there unless you stumble across someone's like conference presentation of how I did this hard thing using these silly pieces of software. I don't know. Laziness, impatience, and hubris. Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much, Christina and Alie. I mean, I feel like fail stories are so valuable for collective learning and supporting collaboration, right? We've all been there, and it's really generous for you to share about your experience. So hopefully something good comes out of it for you and the rest of the collective. If there aren't any more questions for Alie and Christina right at this moment, maybe if Jeremy and Henry are still here, we could double back because we did receive a question in the chat for them. And I see, hi, Jeremy and Henry, great. So Sarah Jane's had a question for you. What are your plans to ensure that new archival descriptions are added going forward? That is, how often are you running these processes?
Yeah, that's fine. We have a quick and simple answer to that. We run them every Monday at what, I guess 0000 hour. So once weekly. And that will just take in everything that we've written the previous week. If it's an upper level description. If it's new upper level descriptions, you won't get that much. So we often do file lists like almost every day. So that won't get captured into it necessarily.
Excellent, thank you. We can take a couple more minutes at this point if anybody has questions for any of the presenters from this morning. Otherwise, we've entered the break zone. So 10:45 to 10:55, we can regroup. And then we will have Crystal Mills from Western University up next at 10:55.
Hi, everybody. So welcome back from break. I'm sure that people are making their way back to their screens. Hopefully you managed to refresh your caffeinated or decaffeinated beverages and are ready to go for our second half of our mini conference this morning. Just while people are coming back, I wanted to go back to some of the polls that we have, and thank you to Sarah for moderating the first session, but also for putting together these polls. So have a juicy one for you here. We'll take a couple of minutes. Let me see if I got the right one. Yes. Would you rather live in a world where AI does most jobs or in a world without AI? Feels topic of the month, decade, century. And if you have anything to add, please pop it into the chat. Some context for why you want to keep getting paid, Randy. Oh, you mean you can, if you can keep getting paid? Sure. Alex says, I was really hoping that this was about the kind of AI created juices you might drink. Well, I mean, you can share that as well if you want, Alex.
It's a close heat so far.
It is. I guess it's the nature of the inflection point we're in. Define AI. Yes, well, that is the question, isn't it? I don't know that I can do that for you, Dan. Not Skynet. Yep, I think that's probably a good thing to aim for. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any more votes coming in. So let's see. It's a very close tie. Can you see that? Is that showing?
We can.
Yes, so 56% said a world without AI. 44%, a world where AI does most jobs. Well, so I guess we will see. Well, maybe we can revisit this in 10 years or 3. I'm not sure how quickly that's going to happen. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Hopefully everyone is back in the room with us. Thanks to all our presenters from the first session. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Thanks for all the presentations for the first session. I think it's really interesting to see how we're all sort of coalescing around very common work in from different guess with different focuses at the moment. We're moving on to a presentation from Crystal. On resource sharing, which is also something very topical. So over to you, please. Crystal.
Great. Everyone can mandatory. Can you see my slides? Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm here to break our theme of external data harvesting and instead to talk about resource sharing. So thank you for joining me. I'm Crystal Mills, User Services Manager at Western Libraries. I'm going to go pretty fast and hopefully keep it to 10 minutes. There's a lot of numbers in this presentation, but I know that you can all watch the recording and view the slides later. Resource sharing and interlibrary loans happens to be a very data-rich part of user services. And as you know, there's been a huge change in this area as we work to sunset Racer and gradually enable features and partners within Alma resource sharing. So we're in a period right now where the data is really messy. And I've been learning how to get what I need from analytics and then how it fits into the larger picture of data from our resource sharing software ecosystem. So when I first wrote the proposal for this presentation, this was my theme. This is like my whole vibe. I had dozens of analytics. Every month I was scrutinizing their output. Every month there would be some new change introduced to the system and I'd have to go back and reflect on what had happened and the numbers were changing. I hope to present to you a slightly more organized picture of Western's resource sharing assessment data landscape and a lot of things that I've found interesting as I've been thinking about the changes that we've implemented. So just to start out, here is a timeline that nobody really needs. This is the past couple of years. As Christina says, this was the dark times, but a lot of my data is going to compare our pre-Alma, pre-migration, pre-pandemic data of 2018-19 to the past fiscal year of 22-23, and that's because there's not really like a normal year in between. So instead of trying to like map out all of the weirdness that happened, I'm just going to give a snapshot pre-pandemic, pre-Alma, and then the current state of the last year. So this is the big picture. This is filled requests, lending plus borrowing. So the purple is print and the brown is copies. So in 2018-19, print versus copies was like 60-40 split pretty closely. And then last year things changed. So you can see that not only do we have more than double the number of filled requests, the proportions have also changed dramatically and is now about 80-20 in favor of print. So print is up 3 times what it used to be. Here is our student assistant, Alie, with honestly a pretty standard shipment of mail for a slow period of the year. This was taken in May, so it easily could have been double that in January or September, which are our busiest months. This is also just our incoming mail, so we get an equally sized amount of books out the same afternoon. We ship about 100 to 150 pounds of books a day and receive about the same. And so something important to note is that while the AFN has drastically reduced the staff intervention needed for every item for print resource sharing, the shipping processes are all more or less the same and hasn't really seen a ton of efficiencies. So where's the demand coming from? I think it's fair to say that 2 of the big changes that played a role are our shared resources policy. So users no longer can recall local materials and their requests are essentially converted into resource sharing requests. Also, we know that our print materials that are not held locally are much more visible to users in Discovery. So I wanted to dig into this a little bit more. So what I did was I compared our AFN requests for the last year against our local holdings using ISBN. And I found that on average, for the last year, 37% of Western AFN requests had local print copies. So there's exceptions like items that are missing or on order or on reserve that wouldn't have been like recallable, but otherwise 37% of those requests could have been recalls under the old policy. So now obviously the AFN is an incredible improvement to the patron experience and to the staff experience. Users no longer have their items recalled. They're no longer inconvenienced by that policy. a resource sharing request often gets filled faster than a recall would have, and staff no longer have to handle issues related to overdue recalls, such as like disputing recall fines. However, a process that used to happen just like locally on campus has now been diverted into an ILL workflow. And so how can we tell the impact of the policy change versus enhanced discoverability? Well, this is a bit of like a thought experiment and an extrapolation of our data. But if we compare the print-filled borrowing in RACER from 2018-19 to last year, we had an increase of about 5,200 items. So possibly we can say that 37% of that increase is from the recall policy, so 1,900 requests, and the remainder, 63%, could be attributable to the discovery change. So this kind of assumes that demand stayed the same between those 2 years and that requester behavior kind of operates in a vacuum that's only impacted by what the library is doing. But I still thought it was an interesting way to maybe try to quantify that impact. And then because I just happened to have the data, I made this tree map of Western borrowing requests where we locally own the title represented by LC code. And I thought this could be used in a lot of ways as sort of like the seed for thinking about print collections development. But mostly I thought it was kind of a cool chart. And then, so in gathering statistics about the ILL ecosystem, things get tricky. We're in a period of change and we're essentially using 5 different systems that are interrelated to different degrees. This is the borrowing workflow. Lending is a bit more straightforward because lending requests come into each system, but they don't move between systems for fulfillment. In borrowing, when a Western user places a request from Omni, it can go through all of these systems before it gets filled. In Alma resource sharing is like a secondary kind of ROTA after rapid ILL or the AFN that happens automatically. But if the request fails, staff manually duplicate the request into RACER and then again into WorldShare. Eventually, we'll be cutting out the middleman of RACER and going right from Alma to WorldShare via API. And then so this is probably a chart that you'll want to like go back to if you have interest in it. This is the same information, but with our borrowing numbers. So you can see the way that the requests flow between systems. We expect that Alma resource sharing numbers will increase over this current year. The new RACER requests, intake stream, those are requests just from May to October 2022, when Western cut off access to RACER for users placing requests. And then throughout the process, there's canceled requests. That's usually when a patron initiates the cancellation because they change their mind, or sometimes staff will cancel a request if it's a duplicate. It's not too often that we won't move them between systems. And then here is the breakdown of requests by platform for both borrowing and lending. And this is not really a fair picture because the AFN, RACER, and WorldShare have been operational for the entire duration of the 2022-2023 reporting period. So as we build out our Alma resource sharing directory, we'll see the RACER numbers decline to 0 by winter next year, hopefully. This is the same data, but represented on a timeline of May to April. So kind of a bit more accurate representation because you can see the volume handled by each system each month and then also where they came online. So rapid ILL was introduced at Western for borrowing in July. And then there's kind of like a peak in November when we got full volume for lending. Alma resource sharing for print has been gradually coming online since November and for digital since January. And then you can also see our big peaks in September and January, which is actually different than historically, where we used to see peaks more around essay writing season. Instead, we're getting these peaks like right at the beginning of the term. And then finally, a couple more just like stray facts that I've noticed that were interesting to me. Our overall fill rate has improved substantially. So from 55% to 77%, like 55% in 2018-19 to 77% last year, which is amazing. And the unfilled requests do include requests that were canceled by patrons or duplicates. at Rapid ILL, I'm sure many people are interested, likes to advertise a 95% fill rate for borrowing requests. But there's a big difference between the stats that you pull from the Rapid website versus the ones that come from Alma Analytics. So I think what's happening is Rapid is not counting anything that doesn't start proceeding through their ROTAs. So if you look at digital borrowing requests from Analytics, the Rapid fill rate is more like 70% for us. We've also anecdotally noticed a lot more people placing requests for popular leisure reading, which is tricky because academic libraries, we might have 1 or 2 copies that are usually on loan, and then the public libraries might have dozens of copies, but those are all waitlisted. So unfortunately, we end up canceling those sort of requests with a note for the patron to try to request it again when the hype has died down and everybody's finished reading Jeanette McCurdy's "I'm Glad My Mom Died." That was a big one this last year. And then not unexpectedly, the breakdown of user groups has also changed. So undergraduate requesting has increased, presumably due to enhanced discovery of shared resources. And then finally, a little bit of editorial complaining from me. The request data is infuriating. It doesn't have standard identifiers that actually match our holdings. So like a request has an MMS ID, but it's like a temporal number that doesn't actually connect to our print records. The requests change over time if you look at them every month, because the requests are going through a process where they get completed or canceled and they change statuses. The statuses themselves are weird. The terminology doesn't represent what actually happened with the request. So you get all these requests that are like deleted or rejected, but it doesn't actually mean that they were not filled. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you. I realize I had probably like an hour of content to cover in 10 minutes, so I can take questions by email. And I am on the Resource Sharing Analytics Working Group, and so I'm hoping to bring some of the information I have to them and they can scrutinize this and we can find a way to roll this out for everybody and so that everyone can have similar reports that work across institutions.
Thanks, Crystal. I will reiterate the sentiments. Wow, that yes, there's a lot in there, and I think that it will be fantastic to have that feeding into that working group. So thank you very much for putting all that together. And I'm sure that a lot of people will be going back and sort of having a look at sort of how you've represented all of that as well. So we did have, you may have answered this question. We do have a couple of minutes because I did take us a little bit further. So I want to make sure that you get that time for questions. From Dan about the Rapid ILL, you may have answered this just after he asked it, but
Rapid, we're just using it digital only. So if I indicated that it was for print, I might have misspoke, but no, digital only for Rapid.
Okay. And then I'm just seeing if there's any more questions. Lots of messages of appreciation. So that's great. If anyone does have any questions for Crystal, and I'm sure that we can take them a little bit later, or as she says, follow up with her directly. Okay, thank you very much. That's fantastic. And the slides will be available following the mini conference as well. So next we have Carolyn Sullivan from the University of Ottawa, and she will be talking about selecting Alma Digital for digital asset management. So
thank you.
Take it away.
Just one moment while I remember how to share my slides. And hopefully all of you can see that now.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Sullivan. I'm the Systems Librarian for Digital Repositories, and I'm speaking to you today from the U-Ottawa Library on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. So today I'll be presenting to you on why we selected Alma Digital, Ex Libris's digital asset management system, and how we're currently using it. So first of all, why did we need a digital asset management system, or DAMS, for the U Ottawa Library? Most, if not all of you listening, probably share our practical reasons for needing one. We had a number of digital resources locally stored on hard drives or disks that our users couldn't access online. This represented a barrier to access for mobility impaired and out-of-town members of our community before the dark times, and became even more problematic during quarantines. Hard drives and disks are also a problematic storage solution because they're unstable, and while DAMs would not offer the same measures to prevent file degradation as true archival preservation systems like permafrost or Rosetta, most commercial DAMs use more reliable cloud storage. And at the very least, a DAMs would provide an additional copy of the material, and as we know, lots of copies keep stuff safe. In addition, a DAMS can help with inventory of digital assets and help keep track of which materials are already digitized, so that we aren't replicating effort in scanning materials that have already been scanned. So the first stage of selecting a DAMS for the U Ottawa Library occurred before I joined, and that involved the creation of a DAMS working group. And this talented team laid out the technical and practical requirements for DAMS based on our needs. And here's a list of some of the practical requirements that we had here. We'll be returning to that later. Then the working group sent out a survey to other Canadian GLAM organizations on their current DAMs, the type of assets they were storing in it, and their satisfaction relative to some of the requirements I've listed. They completed an initial assessment of the most popular options, and I assumed control of the projects upon my employment. So the three best options for us were determined to be Alma Digital, Islandora, and Hyrax/Samvera. Our initial preference was for an open source option like Islandora or Hyrax because, like open access publishing, open source software aligns with the value we place on information equity, both within our profession and within our institution. Open source code is freely available to the public to use and modify depending on the license it's produced under, and customizations made for one institution are generally made available to all institutions. Selecting open source software also provides a library more local control over its infrastructure and disrupts the creation of monopolies by vendors. However, the literature also describes significant challenges with open source software, such as poor documentation, limited support, and a steep learning curve. In contrast, the commercial option, Alma Digital, we decided would be easier to implement, and we'd found Ex-Libris to provide fairly reliable support for their software. Plus, Alma Digital was fully integrated in the familiar Alma interface and workflows. So to look at which of these candidates was best in practice, I completed a more in-depth analysis through several means, including evaluating test instances of the software, informal interviews with other repository administrators, some of whom are indubitably listening in on this call, a review of the available literature on DAMs, and discussions with vendors. And on this slide is a summary of how these three options compared relative to our requirements at U Ottawa. On some aspects, all three of the options performed similarly, such as in-browser viewing of a wide range of file types, support for bilingualism, the ability to browse by collection, ability to search, and permalinks. what I'm going to review here is where performance diverged. Just as a disclaimer, some of you using Islandora might have had dissimilar experiences depending on your use cases and how much you were able to modify or customize the out-of-box configuration. So out of box, we found that Alma Digital outperformed Hyrax and Islandora in regard to access controls. It offers very granular access controls, including restricting like a digital resource to a list of specific users. And that particular capability could be practical if you're dealing with more sensitive archival materials where you want the users to sign an agreement for their use before allowing them to access it. With regards to potential integrations of digital asset management systems with other platforms or tools, appealingly, Alma Digital's already integrated into the Alma interface and workflows, so no additional work would be necessary to configure a single sign-on as would be required for Hyrax and Islandora. We'd also hope to find a platform that had an integration with Archivematica so as to eliminate duplication of effort in uploading materials to our preservation and discovery layers. Now, while both Islandora and Hyrax had Archivematica integrations developed for obsolete versions of their software, neither's been updated for the current version 8, and both would need considerable retooling. Another consideration was workflow. As previously mentioned, Alma Digital was favorable because our staff were already familiar with Alma workflows. Another consideration, it's fairly easy in all the platforms to add items one by one. It becomes slightly more challenging in some of the open source options to configure addition of items through batch uploads, since, well, modules for batch uploads do exist, Bulkrax and Hyrax and the Drupal migrate tools for Islandora. You need to do a bit of work on configuration in the backend. Alma Digital does come out of box with a upload tool in the graphic user interface that works well for files under 1 gigabyte each. For uploading files over 1 gigabyte, there's an open source tool that also works very well that can upload files directly to the Amazon cloud storage using an API. But where we found Alma Digital was particularly helpful was in respect to our practical requirements. Knowing that open source software has a steep learning curve, we wanted to ensure that we'd have adequate support when configuring and modifying it. Hyrax has a slightly smaller user community than Islandora or Alma Digital. Well, Islandora had many users across Canada. A lot of them were planning to migrate their resources out of Islandora as version 7 became obsolete, particularly since as the November 2021 sunsetting came by, there wasn't really a roadmap for that migration. Again, your mileage may vary, but what I found in the literature documentation and from interviews was that these two particular open source communities were a bit disorganized in terms of planning and documentation. So I began looking into Islandora 7 in August 2021. And again, there wasn't a roadmap for the migration that was going to happen 3 months later. Hyrax had recently moved from version 2 to version 3, but the documentation for the most recent version wasn't entirely on the web yet. So it was a bit fun trying to find out exactly what all the capabilities of this software was when there were different versions available and documentation for different versions up. Another practical consideration, of course, was considering the cost for these platforms in terms of finances and human resources. Open source platforms that run in-house or require considerable modifications have high staffing requirements from IT. Some of the institutions I spoke to, like U of B and McGill, had like one or more full-time programmers spending the majority of their time on this application. If you aren't willing to dedicate a programmer to working on this, independently implementing and hosting an open source repository might not be a reasonable option for your institution. There's also the option of like paying a vendor like Cofactor for Hyrax or Discovery Garden for Islandora to either host a repository for you or to implement the software and provide additional support as required. But depending on the extent of the modifications required to meet your technical requirements, implementation can be quite expensive. As it happened, the cost of an annual subscription to Alma Digital was much less than the cost quoted to us for a vendor to implement a in-house Hyrax application for us. So despite our preferences for open source, owing to the many challenges we identified for working with it, some of which I've reiterated here, we concluded as of last May that Alma Digital better satisfied our current needs. And having selected Alma Digital, the implementation was actually extremely straightforward. Our AUL negotiated the cost of Alma Digital as an add-on to our OCUL Alma subscription, and we started adding content. And our current use cases for Alma Digital include digitized archival materials, our digital aerial photos collection, and hosting streaming videos whose rights are owned by the Ottawa Library. So just to provide a few additional details on those usages, this is a digitized archival text, Hours of the Virgin, and we're able to attach the digitized record directly to the existing bibliographic record in Alma for the book. So users looking for that in the catalog can simply click on the link to browse the book. And here we have our digital air photos collection. And while Alma might seem like an unusual place in which to store digital air photos, given that these resources are usually discovered through a hyperlinks map on platforms like, say, ArcGIS Online, storing them in an Alma collection increases their visibility and makes users more aware of their existence. So to upload the photos, I converted the existing metadata to DC format in XML using a Python script, then use the Alma Digital Uploader through the interface to upload multiple files at a time. And the photos have been organized here by year and then by flight line. And finally, the other place where we're using Alma Digital is hosting streaming videos. So we pay for the rights to a number of videos that aren't hosted online by vendors. And we make these videos available. Well, we made them available previously by hosting them on a third-party platform like McIntyre Media. But since Alma Digital is able to stream time-based media and can restrict viewing to registered users, we were able to move these into Alma. So some of our challenges. An ongoing issue that preceded our decision on which dams to get and which has continued since was just what to store where when you have several different repositories. And that's something we're still kind of working out. and looking towards the future. One article I found interesting in Code for Lib was always be migrating. And it's this fact that all software solutions are temporary. Back in 2007, Karen Schneider, a library technologist, said that the lifespan of a piece of software might be 10 years. Nowadays, it's probably more like 3 to 5. So the choice you make today is not for eternity. What you want to focus on is ensuring that your data has good integrity, you have appropriate metadata, and you can move those resources out in the future if you need to. As far as right now, we're happy with Alma Digital. However, you know, we want to keep our eyes on the horizon to see what might be coming next. And in that sense, we've seen that the most recent iteration of DSpace that folks are starting to go out to has some exciting new features that would meet the technical requirements that weren't available in the previous features that we were looking at even a year ago, like IFFF for supporting images, or like a media viewer for time-based materials. And as many of you have also heard, we have a shared repository infrastructure possibly on the horizon. So, woohoo. Yeah, and I don't know if I have time for questions. Danica?
We might just ask people to keep those questions until after the next presentation, and then we'll come back to them. But
awesome.
Thanks, Carolyn. That was a really interesting insight into the decision-making process there. And I do, yeah, I think it's really interesting to be thinking about that idea of always be migrating. I feel like that's a situation that we're kind of in. Okay, so thank you very much, Carolyn. Now we've got our last presentation now from the York University. We have Adam Taves, William Denton, and Patty Ryan, giving us a bit of a provoking some thoughts on where we may go next. So over to you.
Thank you. Everyone can hear me. You can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Assume that's yes. Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. My name is Adam Taves, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Bill Denton and Patty Ryan. The three of us work in the Content Development and Analysis Department at York University Libraries. This session is a bit of a think piece to pose some questions and to think about some opportunities. Writ large, the session focuses on the concept of a shared print collection among CF partners, especially as enabled by the development of the automated fulfillment network. We start from the premise that physical collections have formed the bedrock of how we have served our communities. Physical books are proven technology, and in this regard, academic libraries' approaches largely can be summarized as we collect for present needs, we collect for future needs, and we collect for long-term access. Our reliance on physical collecting is revealed quite plainly in the numbers. At the launch of the AFN, CF's shared physical collection contained over 25 million items. We've built our services around physical books, including lending to our patrons and resource sharing, a practice used across the world and in North America, well established in law. Lending and resource sharing are services wherein libraries have consistently prevailed against publisher challenges. And built upon the twin frameworks of extensive physical collections and established lending and resource sharing procedures and infrastructure, OCUL libraries have expanded considerable resources to make physical lending and resource sharing work well and sustainably. And here I have some snapshot of RACER data. This is January 2015 to June 2020, and it shows tens of thousands of books moving between OCUL institutions to collectively support the teaching, research, and just the plain interests of our campus communities collectively.
Sorry. Racer is soon to be in the past. And now for print, we have the Automated Fulfillment Network, the AFN, but we also have ebooks. Now, it's not as simple as just the AFN for print. Resource sharing in the broadest sense includes the AFN and digital fulfillment and interlibrary loan. And there are rules for getting content for accessibility purposes. But we're talking about people borrowing books as is for their own use. Until recently, if I wanted to get a print book that my library didn't have, then I'd log into Racer, fill out a complicated form. A bunch of people worked on it. I waited a while, and then I could borrow it for 3 weeks. Now I press a button, fewer people work on it, and 2 days later it's there, and I can keep it for as long as I want. This is fantastic, and we have an almost province-wide union catalog and union collection. And the AFN is used a lot. I don't have full AFN-wide data to compare with that Racer chart, but just for York, outbound books went from 3,000 in the calendar year to 7,000. Crystal Mills, I want to talk to you more about what you were talking about. But this is 133% growth. But that's print books, only print books. And licensing prevents us from lending ebooks in the same way. That's a bit simplified too, but you know the situation. I can't click on a button and borrow an ebook from another library. Meanwhile, we're moving to buying a lot more ebooks and fewer print books. Consortially or on our own, we're buying big front and back list collections from publishers or on platforms such as De Gruyter. And we're moving to e-preferred in our approval plans. So that means that if a new book comes out and the ebook comes out at around the same time as the print, then we get the ebook instead of the print. There are many advantages to this. There are some disadvantages. I mean, one being that sometimes you need to read a book in print. At Gobi, where most of us do most of our print buying and individual ebook buying, reports that 2 years ago, 3/4 of their Ontario sales were in E. And last year, when some pandemic adjustments were sorted themselves out, then half their sales were E. So looking forward, every year, we're all buying fewer print books that we can share and more ebooks that we cannot share. We have a large shared legacy collection of print materials that will grow very little. If a library has a user who needs a book and their AFN partners have it only in E, not in print, because maybe they're all E-preferred or they're relying on others for print, then there's no way to borrow it, and the library will need to buy a copy of their own. This will be a problem. Fewer and fewer books, new books that we can share, and more new books that we cannot. So how does the AFN stay relevant? How do we provide equitable access for all our users when we're signing license agreements that limit what we can do with these ebooks? Large libraries with good budgets can continue to buy some print material, but if other libraries know that we're buying, will they? If administrators know that their library doesn't need to buy a print book because it can be borrowed from somewhere else, will they cut the budget? Will we all rely on other libraries to buy things that our users need? Where does responsibility lie? This could lead to a tragedy of the commons, where if we are not acting together for our shared benefit, then the shared resources will be exploited and depleted.
So, hi everyone. How do we avoid this tragedy of the commons? Well, today we propose that it needs a multi-pronged strategy. Yes, of course, we must continue to advocate for digital lending and maintain our strong commitments to open access. But we also must begin to shift our attention in a more serious way to building a true print union collection. We must move from a mindset of not just sharing what is ours, but building it together. Moving from collection development strategies that do not just consider the needs of our own campus users, but the needs of users across the province. And we think that the time to do this is now for a few compelling reasons. First, as Bill and certainly Crystal's data showed, print collections are still valued by our users. We can spend a lot of time talking about the reasons for that, but the uptake of the AFN is very good evidence. Second, as Bill noted, the digital lending landscape is still evolving, and we can't anticipate a world anytime soon where we can loan entire ebooks freely and easily. Third, we have the infrastructure. We can begin to use the AFN as more than just a means of extending the reach of our local collections. but as part of the technology that underpins a province-wide collection of significant breadth and depth. And here we think we have a unique chance to realize a vision laid out in a 1966 Provincial Commission report known as the Spinks Report. It recommended, and this is a quote, "in the strongest possible terms that an Ontario Provincial Library be established." And you can find mention of the Spinks Report in Robert Blackburn's History of the University of Toronto called Evolution of the Heart, and Adam has put the reference into the chat. Most importantly, we think we should do this because it's the right thing to do. Building a union print collection will democratize access to collections in ways that aren't currently possible with e-content. And we think this will serve our users very well, not just our local users, but those across the province. We think we have a responsibility to do both. So, as always, the question is, how do we do this in a sustainable way? We are not going to answer this question in 10 minutes, but we do want to suggest some ideas and perhaps spark some discussion today. So perhaps we begin by thinking about how we leverage our successes with consortial licensing to collaborative print purchasing. So here are some what ifs. What if we developed a collaborative futures-wide print approval plan where we all benefit from bulk discounts, space savings, and the many other benefits of collaboration? What if we had shared commitments among all CF partners to in-depth collection development in targeted areas so that we ensure the breadth and depth of a province-wide collection? What if we investigate and adopt acquisition strategies used by large public libraries or multi-site libraries that help strike a balance between local collecting and systems-wide collecting? And what if we began by setting up a CF print strategy working group to begin to think more formally about the way forward in this regard? So these are just some ideas to get us thinking about moving closer to the vision introduced by Spinks almost 60 years ago. We look forward to hearing some of your thoughts on these ideas. And on behalf of Adam and Bill, I thank you for your time, and to the organizers for a really great morning.
Thanks, Adam, Bill and Patty. That was some really interesting questions there, and I'm keen to hear what people think about this. I did want to share something. I'm really glad that you brought up the Spinks report. It's a bit of a reference point for us here in the OCUL and Scholars Portal offices. We go back to it often and sort of, you know, think about that. But I also wanted to flag the vision for collaborative futures as well, which is something that I think we spent a lot of time implementing this one system and with a subset of our membership. And I think we're at a stage now, as you're talking about, having a look at this really at a higher level and seeing where we can move next. So I just wanted to, I'll share my screen just so I can share this with you all. It's on the Collaborative Futures wiki. And like the Spinks report, it does refer to that Ontario-wide library collection, which includes print as well as AE. So I really think that we can keep this in mind as we're looking towards what we do next. So I will pause now and see if we have any questions. I have to bring up the chat. So if you would like to put a question in the chat, you can do that, or you can raise your hand and unmute. And I see, while I'm getting the chat up, I see Mark has raised his hand. Go ahead, Mark.
So this is a, can you hear me?
Yes.
So it's a question for Patty, Bill, and Adam. And I'm the chair of the CF Accessibility Working Group. And one of the things we've identified is an accessibility problem where if a library owns an ebook, only owns the ebook, they do not have the option to borrow a print from a partner. So we've been looking into solutions for it, but we haven't found one yet. And I'm just wondering if that has come across your radar and affects anything that you're kind of discussing.
Just for clarity, Mark, is that due to configurations, or is that just a policy decision you've made?
No, if deduping if duplicate records are removed, an assumption of PrimoVE is e-resources will do. That if there's an e-resource, that's sufficient. That's their assumption. So what we've done at Laurier is we allow duplicate records to appear in the research results list, which then allows users to either get the print from a partner or the local E. But if we remove the deduplication records, PrimoVE assumes e-access is sufficient. So I don't know if that's affects the thinking of what you're envisioning.
Well, I mean, I would say it shows a limitation of E only, and I mean, I think it speaks to what Patty and Bill alluded to, you know, in that people have many reasons for wanting, you know, something in physical format or perhaps something in electronic format. And what we're looking at here is the potential really to serve all needs, regardless of what users prefer. You know, in terms of the configurations, I can't speak to that directly. I'm trying to remember what our Omni looks like, but I think you're just driving home the point that we want to keep as wide a breadth of resources in various formats available to our users as possible.
Yeah, I think what it suggests is that if they want to E and print, we'd have to recommend everyone allow duplicate records to appear in their search results. That would be the configuration to do.
Thanks, Mark. There is a couple of responses to provide some more context on this in the chat. So it's Randy notes it's the configuration for resource sharing. It is such that resource sharing form is not presented if there's an available copy. Yeah, so yeah, it's a configuration issue, but I think that's acknowledging what we're working with and finding ways to move forward with that is obviously a big part of the discussion. Let's see, Christina says, I think that the Keep of Downsview partnership is starting a pilot project for collaborative print collecting of low use material based on the Ivy Plus model. And Paul says, superb direction, but it requires a real hard-nosed commitment to weeding and cultivating the physical resources, because we can't just build more storage facilities indefinitely.
Yeah, just a side note on that comment, I spoke with the collection manager at TPL who said this was the biggest challenge for their model, getting local collections, local branches to keep up with weeding. So it isn't a vision that doesn't have complications, but
absolutely. So Melissa says a floating print collection would be exciting in a way to have a better environmental footprint. And Randy notes that Trent is already doing that, and I think that Jeff has mentioned that before in one of our drop-ins or mini conferences. But yeah, I think that that's a good example of that. Sorry, my chat keeps on moving. I'm trying to keep up. Charlotte said, I think that there's a delivery question here outside the 401 corridor and the smaller campuses. Oh yeah, Patty, so the Hamilton Public Library is floating their collections as well. That's interesting. And a floating sorry. Yeah, the sustainability lens, considering the environmental costs of shared collections. There, perhaps Mackenzie suggests, I don't know, but I think that the answers might be surprising. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about that, the environmental costs in relation to the AFN and the things that we've seen change there since we've implemented. And I wonder how that's going to progress over the next little while as well. So Charlotte notes that the OCUL Information Resources Committee, one of our OCUL standing committees, have also been discussing collective collecting and those trends and possibilities. So an interesting to take a start at larger discussions. Yeah, and I think that we're really at that point now where we can be looking towards these broad OCUL discussions, and we have a good baseline for working together in this way, but it was always intended to be sort of beyond just working within Omni in the same system, to be able to look at how that can impact other things we do together. Paul mentions the physical logistics would be challenging, but completely doable, perhaps 48-hour service within Ontario, and storage costs vary enormously depending on where you park the physical assets. So spread the joy. Jeff mentions, consortium-wide weighting would definitely free up more space in our stacks. So Randy can have a hot tub in his office. I'm sure that's top priority. So I think that this is, there seems to be a lot of interest in this. So I would, I think that we can definitely find a way of continuing the discussion, whether that's the working group that you're suggesting, or sort of having a few more broad discussions like this where we can work through some of those ideas. But I guess, is there anything aside from what you've presented to us that you you want us to step forward with next on this?
I don't want to speak for Bill and Adam. I think, as Adam suggested, the idea of this was it was a think piece, and it's intended to be a bit intentionally provocative to get people thinking about returning to some of the directions that were conceived in the original CF proposal and before that. So I don't think we have any specific asks coming out of here except to go away and think about some of the provocative things that we've suggested.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Stay on the line here, but I did also want to just open up the questions. If anyone had any questions for any of our presenters this morning, feel free to pop them in the chat. Dream big, yes. And yes, more and more working groups in our future, I dare say. Okay, so we're still happy to accept questions if anyone wants to pop them in the chat there. But I guess as we've got a little over 5 minutes left, I wanted to say thank you to everyone for attending this morning. Thank you very much to our presenters. I think it's been wonderful to see how we're at the stage now where we can share successes and failures, as it were, and really have those knowledge sharing experiences and sharing solutions as well. And particularly in those areas of sharing collections that are we want to be making more visible. I think that's one of the benefits of what we're doing here with Omni. And I think that being able to share those workflows, and configurations for that is great. Thanks for all the questions that have come through, and of course make sure that you you can send any onto the OCUL email address. Alex, I might get you to put the email address in the chat for everyone. We can pass those questions on to the speakers. And as I said, the slides will be made available on Spot Docs, but we'll also be sharing them in a follow-up email with a recording as well for those who have registered. I'll be following up shortly after today's session with a feedback survey. If you could give us some feedback on what you thought of the presentations today, and also any ideas that you have for future mini conferences or drop-in sessions. Once again, also thank you to those from our colleagues at the Ontario colleges for joining us. I hope that this has been helpful for you, and we would love to have more opportunities to do sharing sort of across institutions like that as well. Thanks again, particularly to the organising committee. We have a number of people who have been working behind the scenes to get us to this point. So thank you to Sarah Cairns for moderating with me. Thank you to Madeline Donnelly and Jordan Bulbrook, to I don't have the Roderica and Katrina Fortner, and Kimberly as well. And I think that is everybody. Thank you all for the work that you've put in to help coordinate this and make it all happen. So I think that is it. If we don't have any more questions, we can stay on the line if you do want to talk to any of our presenters. Otherwise, thanks very much. Have a great week, everyone, and we will see you again soon.